that you're all awake. That's a good response. Welcome to the Hoover Presidential Library Museum. My name's Tom Schwartz. I'm the director, and I'm delighted you could join us today. If you're not a member of the Hoover Presidential Foundation, I hope you'll take home a membership application and consider joining. They support us in all our exhibit, education, and public program offerings, including today's talk. It is indeed a great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, William Anderson. As Bill reminded me, our paths first crossed in Springfield, Illinois, when I was still in my former capacity as the state's Abraham Lincoln expert. He was writing a series of articles, travel articles for various national publications, and we got together over lunch and dinner so he could pick my brain, what was left of it, on Lincoln. The only difference now, besides both of us being a few years older, is that he still writes about Ingalls, and I now focus all my attentions on Herbert Hoover and his legacy. Bill is a person with a great gift for writing, as well as numerous other talents. He's a historian, educator, and author of 25 books ranging from biography, travel, and history. Anderson's special passion lies with the study of Laura Ingalls Wilder and her writings. He's written a number of books for HarperCollins that explore this topic. Laura Ingalls Wilder, a biography, remains the best introduction to her life. Laura Ingalls Wilder Country is an amazing visual journey of the people and places in Laura Ingalls Wilder's life and books. Not growing up reading the Little House books, I found this a great primer to a pilgrim's journey through Wilder's life. His recent book, The Select Letters of Laura Ingalls Wilder, fills an important void in the primary source materials available to Wilder aficionados. And as we were talking, he indicates since this book's come out, he's received so many other new letters that I'm sure that another volume will be appearing in the years ahead. The great bulk of the material focuses on the correspondence between Wilder and her daughter and ghost editor Rose Wilder Lane. As a writer, Anderson is always on the lookout for new and exciting projects. One recent fan letter from a boy in Indiana suggested that Bill write a book on space aliens. We will see. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome William Anderson.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Labor Day. I can't think of a more unique way to spend my Labor Day than being here at the Hoover Presidential Library. This site has been a magnet for me for several decades. I've been here as a researcher many times. I have spoken here several times, and it is wonderful to be back and meet so many people here at the library. As I looked far back in my memory, I recall the first time I ever came to the Hoover. And that was in June of 1979. And I was driving west on I-80 to start another summer in DeSmet, South Dakota as a tour guide at the Wilder sites there. I was a college student, and altogether I spent 7 summers in DeSmet in what I look back on as one of the most unique and enjoyable and historically fulfilling college summer job a kid ever had. I was working along with other college students, and we hosted the thousands of tourists that came to see the 2 existing Ingalls homes in DeSmet. And I was looking forward in June of '79 for another summer out in South Dakota. Well, I saw the sign on I-80 for the Hoover Presidential Library, and it was time to take a little rest stop. So I pulled in and got so fascinated by the galleries and the data on President Hoover. Being a history major, of course, that was right up my line. And as I was touring the museum, I thought, Rose Wilder Lane, the daughter of Laura Ingalls Wilder, wrote a book called The Making of Herbert Hoover back in 1920. And I wondered, could there be any data here? Does anybody here at the library know about Mrs. Lane's book on Hoover? They were actually quite fast friends in the latter part of their life, being so politically similar in their thoughts. I mentioned this to a staff member, and I was quickly ushered into Tom Thalkin's office. He was the director at that time. And he speedily produced a fat folder of Rose Wilder Lane's letters to the president and carbons of Hoover's letters back to her. And he asked me at that time, do you have any idea where Rose Wilder Lane's papers might be? I did. Roger Lee McBride was the heir of Rose Wilder Lane and, by default, the heir of the Laura Ingalls Wilder estate. And I knew at that point that Roger was burdened down by this mass of paper that family accumulated and saved. Being thrifty pioneers, they never threw anything away. And I also knew that Roger was thinking about divesting himself of this huge glut of historical material. He mentioned to me he was considering the Library of Congress and the University of Virginia as a place to deposit the papers. I silently thought to myself, I really think those papers need to be in the Midwest. That's where the story was played out. That's where the Wilders emanated. That's where they lived most of their lives. But of course, I didn't say anything. I did, however, provide Tom with Roger McBride's contact information. He quickly got in touch, and it almost seems no time at all, those papers were pledged to be here at the Hoover Presidential Library, and by 1980 they were here. The man that shepherded the Wilder papers from Roger McBride's home in Charlottesville, Virginia, was Dwight Miller, senior archivist at that time. Dwight was the first to work extensively in the organization and all the details of prepping the Wilder Lane papers for scholars to consult. And he did this with an amazing amount of expertise and sensitivity and hospitality towards all who have used those papers. Dwight is emeritus senior archivist, and he's here this morning. Now, Dwight, would you please stand so we can all thank you so much for what you did. Not only is Dwight a marvelous historian, he's a great guy to know. I'm so glad that you're here today, Dwight. Well, I was one of the first persons who consulted the papers when they got here. This is in 1980. And I've thought since, I'm sure Mr. Hoover would be very surprised that the Wilder papers commingle with his various papers as well. But in a way, it's appropriate because he shared the Midwest origins with the Ingalls and Wilder families, and their sensibilities were in many ways similar. In my first consultation of the Wilder Lane papers, I was beset with this explosion of new information about this pioneer family. We know from reading the Little House books that they were literate, they were interested in education and books as they could acquire them, and the papers really showed us that that was the truth. They were wonderful storytellers, and in Wilder's generation, and then of course her daughter Rose's, that storytelling found a national spotlight in the many books that they did. What's my long connection with these Wilder people? I have to tell you, I never intended to write books about them. give talks about them, or anything except enjoy the books when I was a kid. Their long and distinguished shadows have clouded my life in a very pleasant and happy way for many years. I was simply one of the millions of American school kids who were introduced and indoctrinated in the Little House books of Laura Ingalls Wilder. I realized looking back that our teachers loved those books as well and loved sharing them. My experience was not uncommon from many baby boomer kids. Our teachers read the Wilder books to us before lunch, after lunch, at the end of the school day, or to simply quiet us down. In third grade, I wasn't an overly ambitious reader, but as I heard the book Little House on the Prairie, Farmer Boy, The Long Winter, something clicked and I got fascinated by these pioneer stories. I got fascinated with Western expansion and history in general. So much so that I became a history teacher, and as you know, I have done a lot of historical writing. I truly credit all of this with the influence of hearing those books long ago in elementary school. Over the years, the phenomenal success of the Little House books has been reported by the media. I've read everything from 20 million copies, 40 million copies, and a whopping 60 million copies of the Little House books being published here in America alone. When I anticipated coming out here to the Hoover, I thought it was time for me to try to find out from a reliable source exactly how many of those books might have been printed here in America. So I contacted my editor, Tara Wykeham, at HarperCollins, and I said, Tara, please, do you have any concrete figures about the printing history of the Wilder books? She told me that, to their best estimate, 34 million copies of the books have been printed, and they have been distributed in 71 countries, both in foreign translations, foreign dialects, and English editions. So that's about as official as it gets, and I'm glad to be able to share this with you today. Through the years, doing a lot of research on Wilder and writing the book Laura Ingalls Wilder, A Biography, which Tom mentioned, I used Wilder's letters as primary source material. I referred to them heavily because, as you may or may not know, Laura Ingalls Wilder, who wrote so extensively about her early life, kept literally no journals or diaries about the 60 years of her adult experience. She only was prodded to write brief travel diaries when she and her husband Almanzo took a trip or a vacation. So, our documentation about Wilder's life is quite sketchy as far as primary materials. So the letters help me to flesh out their life on Rocky Ridge Farm in Mansfield, Missouri, and her later 25 years as being one of America's best beloved authors. Twice I discovered that HarperCollins was not interested in the selected letters of Laura Ingalls Wilder. First of all, they told me nobody reads collections of letters. When I sent some samples, they said, these are boring. So I put those proposals and the files of letters back in my files. And in 2014, I mentioned it to Tara Wykeham, my editor at HarperCollins. She made some phone calls unbeknownst to me. And in a few days, I had a very excited editor call me from the adult division of HarperCollins saying, we'd love to do the Wilder letters. So, publishing history, if you are an aspiring writer, never be discouraged by a turn down. It's all about timing, and it's all about the particular person that you meet and talk to that has empowered to publish books. So, in 2014, when Pam Hill Smith was working on the last legs of her wonderful pioneer girly annotated autobiography, I was pulling out of my file cabinets a series of folders in which I had collated and organized Wilder's letters from 1894 until 1956. My process was simply to select the best of the letters that gave us more information about Wilder's life, her thoughts, her activities, her family, and her friends, and particularly her dealings with her editors and her readers. At the very last drop deadline on this book in December of 2015, a whole new cache of Wilder letters turned up in a safe in Winfield, Kansas, at the public library. And I heard about those letters and was amazed by the long 12-year period of correspondence that Wilder had with the librarians and the readers and the people of this small Kansas town. One of the letters was a true standout, and I said, I've got to be able to get this into the book, because it was the only letter or written piece that I had ever read by Wilder in which she discussed her writing process. So I very trepidatiously asked my editor, is there any way we can get this letter in? And she said, sure. I've never had such a great editorial experience. My editor said, let's let the book be what it will be. We don't care how long it is. That's unique. I owe that to the staying power of Laura Ingalls Wilder. Anyway, here is that very unique letter which Wilder wrote to the librarian in Winfield, where she explains how she wrote. The first of my books was written to preserve the stories that Pa used to tell me when I was a child. I felt they were too good to be lost, and I wrote them for Rose, not for publication. She insisted that I have them turned over to a publisher. I had no intention of writing anymore, but children clamored for more stories, and Harper's insisted. So I've gone on from one book to the next until I've completed the longhand copy of the 7th. There is still one more to do in the series, and I promise myself that will be the last of my writing. But Harper's is asking for an adult book, and when the series is finished, one never knows. I do my writing in a little room in a corner between my bedroom to the east and the living room to the north. It's a very small room with a window to the west and one to the south, looking out into the big trees around the house. The room is filled with my desk and a table, couch, and small bookcase. It is usually a mess with papers and books and manuscripts scattered about. If you've been to the Laura Ingalls Wilder Home and Museum, this written description is exactly the way that room is preserved today. I write when I can snatch time from housework, telephone, callers, Mr. Wilder, and Ben, our bulldog. I may have written you that I do all my own work, in the old-fashioned way mostly, and the house has 10 rooms. While I'm working at housework, I study about whatever I'm writing. Sometimes I can't sleep for trying to place the right word in the right place. And again, I will wake with a perfectly turned phrase in my mind to be remembered and written down the next day. My memory must be correct in dates and facts, true to the spirit and manners of those times. The old songs and the old sayings must be right. The stories are true of my family and the things that happened to them. But it is a long time ago to remember the details. And it is trying to live those days over again, as I must do, to write of them as I wish. Please don't think I'm complaining of the work. I do love to tell a good story. And I was so glad to be able to slip this letter into the collection. Gems like this were frequent among the 500 plus letters that I had to consult. I whittled the collection down to about 400 letters, bypassing a great deal of the fan mail responses that Wilder made to her thousands of fans. Since the readers, especially the children, tended to ask her the same questions about her family and her books, Wilder's responses tended to be a little formulaic and repetitive, so I only included a representative in the collected letters. All told, this correspondence collection spans Wilder's life between the years 1894 and 1956, from her final pioneering journey by team and wagon throughout the Cold War. One of the first letters I included in the book was a travel letter that Wilder wrote during her family's trek from De Smet, South Dakota to Mansfield, Missouri in 1894. She was 27 that summer and already very skilled at description, one of the writing highlights that we so enjoy in the Little House books. As they were traveling along the road, she kept a journal, and she also wrote a letter back to the home folks in De Smet. She said, "We've had a very pleasant trip so far, no bad weather to delay us, having only had a few light showers, and those in the night. Our camping places have been delightful. We camped on the Jim River in Dakota and on the Blue in Kansas, and nearly every night besides, we've camped on creeks among the trees. It is a continual picnic for the children to wade in the creeks and play in the woods, and sometimes we all think that we're children and do likewise. We've eaten apples, grapes, plums, and melons until we actually do not want for any more. And to satisfy a Dakota appetite for such things is truly something wonderful. We expect to be on the road a week longer before we reach the land of promise." The land of promise was the Ozark country of southern Missouri, where the Wilders settled on Rocky Ridge Farm. 20 laborious years followed of building up that farm, establishing their farmhouse, and this is also the setting where Laura Ingalls Wilder developed her writing voice as a country journalist. By 1915, her only child to survive, Rose Wilder Lane, was a very successful journalist for the San Francisco Bulletin. She invited her parents to come and visit and take in the spectacle of the 1915 World's Fair. Al Manso could not leave the farm work, so Laura went off on that adventure herself. Fortunately, she wrote to Al Manso very regularly about what she saw, what she did, and how much she missed him. Here's her description of her initial view of the Pacific Ocean. "Yesterday afternoon, I went with Rose down to the beach. At Land's End, I had my first view of the Pacific Ocean. To say it is beautiful does not half express it. The water is such a deep, wonderful blue, and the sound of the waves breaking on the beach and their whisper as they flow back is something to dream about. We walked from Land's End around to the point of land and came to the cliff house and seal rocks, but the seals would not show themselves. I wanted to wade. Rose said she never had but would. In other words, I've washed my feet in the Pacific Ocean." 10 years later, in 1925, Wilder again traveled to California. This time she went by car, along with her daughter and their writer friend Helen Boylston. By this time, Lane was a very famous and prolific author and name in the American media, writing books, magazine serials, short stories, essays. She was about as successful in the 20s as it was possible to be as a writer. She was reaping the benefits of easy money of the jazz age and had purchased a 1923 Buick to make this trip in and also to get her parents into driving. So, as they traveled across mountains and deserts on treacherous trails, it was very unusual for women to make an overland trip like this, Wilder once again wrote faithfully to Al Manso. On the evening the women arrived in San Francisco, they visited Capa's Italian restaurant, a place that Rose had described in her book on Jack London, a fictional biography called He Was a Man. Wilder wrote, "The Italian who runs the restaurant and his wife, the Capas, knew Rose and came rushing over to greet her. They took extra pains that we should have a good dinner, and when we tried to pay, they would not let us. The waiter talked a stream of Italian when Rose asked for the check and bowed and smiled and spread his hands and said, "You are welcome." And the woman, Mama Kappa, came and visited with us, and she and Papa Kappa shook hands and bowed us out. It was a delightful, quaint, foreign-looking place. I've often thought about that passage. Here's Laura Ingalls Wilder, who 30 years before was cooking over a campfire on the trail. And now she's going to this bohemian place in San Francisco. That was something of the wonderment she felt in her own life, that she had transitioned so rapidly from covered wagon days to the modern era of the 1920s. It was also her reason for wanting to write the Little House books. In Wilder's travel letters to Manly, her husband, she was known as Bessie to him, and to Rose, Mama Bess, we learn of the deep, deep compatibility of this couple. She admitted to being homesick on the trip, but she warned her husband not to tell Rose. She doted on him in the letters. She said, "Don't worry about cleaning up the house. Let it go until I get back. Only take good care of yourself and the dogs. Please do remember to be careful about the fires. Your warm underclothes are on your sock box in the closet. I don't know whether I told you or not, Manly. I've thought how long you've been tied to the farm, and when I get home, you are going somewhere for a trip, if for no other reason than to make you glad to get home again." Almanzo Wilder's life provided both his wife and daughter with material for books. Laura wrote Farmer Boy about his boyhood in upstate New York, and Rose's Freeland was Almanzo's life as a Dakota homesteader, a best-selling book in 1938. Much has been said and written about the collaboration input of Rose Wilder Lane on the Little House books. The answers and keys to that relationship are here at the Hoover Presidential Library, among the many letters that were saved between the two women. I think Rose would have been amazed to think that her initial input in helping her mother draft The Little House in the Big Woods, which was published in 1932, would evolve into a family project spanning the next dozen years. Ultimately, it became a very intense mother-daughter collaborative effort to tell this panoramic pioneer story, and resulted in the 8 Little House books. The stories were Wilder's. Lane's work amounted to that of an in-house editor, an expert advisor. She was a pro in the publishing business, of course. Indeed, when the Wilder manuscripts arrived at Harper & Brothers, they were ready for the printer. Wilder's last editor, the legendary Ursula Nordstrom, commented that the manuscripts needed none of her attention. "Not ever," she said, with emphasis. Fortunately, this correspondence tells us the story. Both women were very strong-minded and opinionated, even in matters of writing. In 1938, they briefly clashed over the writing of By the Shores of Silver Lake. Lane gave her mother an interesting ultimatum. On February 3rd, 1938, she wrote from New York City, "Dear Mama Bess, you are one of the few writers in the country who would turn down a collaboration with Rose Wilder Lane. But go ahead. You're certainly handling material much better all the time, and if you don't want this book touched, you're absolutely right not to have it touched. I don't say Harper's won't take the manuscript as it stands. They'll take it on your reputation and publish it, but you'll lose your audience for future books and cut your income unless you work it over by concentrating on every word and sentence." Wilder eventually heeded Rose's ultimatum. On February 19th, 1938, she responded, "Rose, dearest, you don't know how much good your letter did me, and I can't tell you. You see, I know the music, but I can't think of the words. I didn't suppose that anyone else ever felt such a failure as I did. Anyway, your letter picked me up and gave me courage. It is sweet of you to say the nice things you did about my writing, and I will try to deserve them more. I'm beginning the hard winter, as you suggested, with the strangeness of the geese not stopping on the lake. What of Almanzo Wilder during these years of heavy literary input by his wife and daughter? The old retired farmer tended his garden, took care of his herd of goats, did woodworking projects, played an occasional game of pool. He occasionally grumbled that he ought to receive some of the royalties for Farmer Boy. After all, it was his story. In reality, his wife's book royalties earned more than the farm had ever hoped to earn. There are several of Almanzo's letters still in existence here at the library, and I wanted to give him a voice in this book, which is dominated by two very voluble women. So in February of 1938, he wrote to Rose, "Dear Rose, I wrote you a 4-page letter telling you how much I appreciated your nice Christmas gifts and all that, and asked you what in the world I should do with that nice big check and all that sort of stuff. And you never said boo. Did you get it? Yours, A.J. Wilder." A year later, he wrote, "We did not hear from you for so long, we were very much worried. You must not do that again. You're going to mind. Did I tell you what a wonderful trip we had last summer? I guess I enjoyed it more than any of the rest of them. Sometimes I think I'd like to take a trip east next summer. Then I think I'm getting old and had better stay by my nice bed. You wrote that I ought to spank Bessie and make her pay more of the expenses. Mrs. Seal says Bessie can get more for her money than anyone she ever saw." And it was true. Even though the royalty checks were flowing in, the Wilders stuck to their frugal ways. In recent years, much has been written about the conservatism of the Wilders and how it served as a subtext in the Little House books. Indeed, Laura and Almanzo and Rose took a dim view of increasing taxation, growing government, and what they felt was a diminishing sense of self-responsibility. Though the Wilders, Laura and Almanzo, voted for Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932, they were very soon disenchanted by the New Deal policies. "God help the poor taxpayers," Wilder exclaimed in a letter to Lane on February 20th, 1939. She wrote, "Mansfield has got $65,000 from the Work Projects Authority, WPA, and is bonding the city for $17,000 to be their share in building a sewerage system. The town has already bonded for more than it's worth." She added, "I wish Mrs. Roosevelt would have to scrub her own floors and do her own work." Ironically, George By was the New York City literary agent for Laura Ingalls Wilder, Rose Wilder Lane, and Eleanor Roosevelt. George once cajoled Lane into attending one of the Roosevelt's garden parties at Hyde Park. When Lane first spied Mrs. Roosevelt, she remarked, "Well, there's the horse. Now, where's the horses behind?" You can see they were not fans. In 1949, Wilder wrote Congressman Clarence Kilburn, who hailed from Malone, New York, Almanzo's old hometown, and who was fascinated by the book Farmer Boy and all the other Wilder books as well. She wrote to the congressman, "We are looking forward to our Congress to save us from the situation which is developing, and I respectfully beg you to use every effort to preserve the way of life which has proven such a good way all through the long years since the Little House in the Big Woods. What we accomplished was without help of any kind from anyone." So, the conservatism of the Wilder family. Wilder's life as an author was a phenomenal icing on the cake in her long, exciting years. Just weeks after Little House in the Big Woods was published, Wilder received her first fan letter. For the next 25 years, the rest of her life, the reader mail only increased until it was simply a staggering amount that arrived in their big oversized mailbox every day. Wilder set about to answer every letter faithfully. Fans also sent gifts. School kids sent their pictures and drawings and education. Experts, teachers, librarians wrote grateful letters to her. Wilder very much valued this reader response and saved all of the fan letters that she received over the years. It's fascinating to read some of them. I was able to include both samples of the fan letters and some of Wilder's responses to her readers. Here's one of the letters. A teacher in Tipton, Iowa, close by,
Yes.
wrote to her, "My pupils are interested in you personally. They ask dozens of questions." And then, as was the custom, each child in the classroom would write a letter to Wilder, and she would write a collective letter back to them. So on February 12, 1935, Wilder wrote, "Dear Mrs. Walsh and 6th grade pupils, it was a pleasure to have all your letters and to know that you liked Farmer Boy. Yes, Almanzo grew to be a very good farmer. He's been a farmer all the years since his father gave him Starlight, the colt, and he's always loved horses. As you have heard, the letter I wrote to the 4th grade, you already have most of your questions answered. Someday soon, I'll write a story about when Laura and Almanzo met way out on the frontier in Dakota Territory before it was divided into 2 states. But before that time, many interesting things happened. After you read Little House on the Prairie, I hope to have another book ready for you. I think I shall call it On the Banks of Plum Creek. Would you like that? I am sure you will like Little House on the Prairie, which will be published early next fall. I'm sorry it's not as large as Farmer Boy. Very best regards to you all, Laura Ingalls Wilder." Receiving a reply from Wilder was a red letter day for her fans. A New York mother wrote back saying, "I wish you could have seen the excitement your letter created here. Richard, our little boy, met the postmaster and came tearing in the house shouting, 'Mother, Mother, look what we've got.' Ruth's eyes nearly popped out of her head." Some Kansas school kids wrote, "We were happy to get your nice letter. It made us feel like we really know you." And it's interesting that Wilder developed ongoing correspondence with some of these readers. A Chicago teacher wrote her of his son's love for the Wilder books, saying, "I read Little House in the Big Woods to them countless times. Truly that story contributed to the dreams of our family to have our own log cabin on Whitefish Lake." A grateful mother sent the Wilders a sugar ration stamp during World War II. "Perhaps," she wrote, "your sugar allotment is not sufficient to permit you to make Mr. Wilder gingerbread or a pie as often as you'd like to." The ultimate gift during rationing times. Joyce, a little girl from New Hampshire, wrote that, "I can't tell you how much I like your books. I could read them 1,000 times and still read them some more." Jack was a young lad from San Gabriel, California, and he wrote Wilder an especially interesting letter. "Dear Mrs. Wilder, I suppose you'll be perfectly fed up by the time this letter reaches you, for I suppose it has the same old stuff that all the other letters have. I've read all of your books except Farmer Boy. That isn't fair to Almanzo, is it? And I've enjoyed them all. I have finally gotten to read These Happy Golden Years, and it has been of great interest to me, though I feel sorry for the book, since I've read it 4 times in the last 2 weeks. I think it is my favorite book. I dislike Nellie Olson because she was so sure of herself, and also think I would have been one of the boys that pestered Miss Wilder in the classroom, that is. It is really funny to read about Nellie so sure of herself that she would ride behind the Morgan horses, Prince and Lady, but only after you'd ridden for a few dozen times did she get to ride twice. Ha ha. Since you've written the books, I have my heart set on South Dakota to homestead there and maybe raise some cataloes, a kind of buffalo and cattle which can survive a Dakota winter. I certainly would like to know what became of Carrie and Grace, and is Almanzo still alive? Because if I go, I would certainly want to have a fine pair of horses, and I know that Almanzo could pick them. I'm only 12 and I have a long way to go. Again, thank you for your wonderful books. Your friend Jack. A girl named Anne sent Wilder a Valentine and wrote, "Although I've never seen your face, I feel as though I had. I've met you in your books, you know, and they've made me glad." Wilder shared the news of this huge fan mail draw with her editor, Ursula Nordstrom. More importantly, she passed on some of the letters to her daughter. "Part of the praise of the book belongs to you," she told Rose. The Wilder correspondence from fans was collected into a book called Dear Laura a number of years ago. And it's very interesting to see the pervasive impact that those books had really all across the world. Mrs. Wilder was simply awestruck by her amazing fame. She'd never imagined such a life, but she responded to it in a very dignified, friendly manner. All was well with her, a friend said, until Almanzo died. They'd been married for 64 years, and on November 8th, 1949, Wilder wrote to break the news to his niece. "Dear Dorothy, this is to bring you the sad news that your Uncle Almanzo died of a heart attack October 23rd. He was buried in the Mansfield Cemetery October 28th. Rose came, but could only stay a week. We'd sold the farm, retaining possession of the house and grounds, and I'm staying on here for a time at least. My future plans are uncertain. With love, your Aunt Bessie." The resourceful former pioneer girl carried on bravely after Almanzo's death. She wrote to an inquiring admirer, "I think I'm as well situated as I could be in town with one of the town annoyances. Never having been timid, I do not mind living alone, except for missing Almanzo. I'm very lonely for him, but that would be so wherever I am." She tended to her correspondence. She welcomed the readers that came to visit her from all corners of the United States, right up until her death in 1957 at the age of 90. I've been asked many times what I learned about Laura Ingalls Wilder through editing her correspondence. I think that I've understood that she was the same person that we know from her books. A person of duty, kindness, strong work ethic, love of family and friends, and above all, a great American storyteller. I've had an unusual experience in the last 4 or 5 months. This book came out in March of this year, of speaking about the book, signing the book. Almost every time I go to a bookstore or a library event or whatever, somebody comes up at the end of the session and either shows me the letter they received from Wilder, or the child of a recipient comes with a copy of the letter saying something like, "We keep this in our safety deposit box. It was one of our family treasures." So there must be thousands and thousands of Wilder letters floating around yet today. I also got an unexpected email in July from Alexander Kryachev from Washington, D.C. And he told me an interesting story. He said, "Recently I was going through a local antique store and I bought a book of stamps which belonged to a local retired Air Force colonel that passed away. Long story short, buried in the back of the pile of stamps was a letter from Mrs. Wilder to this colonel in 1940. when he was a boy in Michigan. Not very familiar with Mrs. Wilder's literary works, I'm Russian by origin. My jaw dropped when I recognized the name. In her letter, the author discusses her works, the book The Long Winter and Farmer Boy. I did some further research and found you. Let me know if this letter is of interest. Of course, I got back with them, and very happily, through a lot of communication, he donated the original letter to the Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum in Walnut Grove, Minnesota. They were thrilled to receive this letter. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Rocky Ridge Farm, May 4th, 1940. My dear William, your letter was sent to me by Harper's. I'm very glad that you like my books and that you have read them all. There's another book written. It will be published likely this fall. It is called The Hard Winter. There's a good deal about Almanzo in it, and I'm sure that you will enjoy it. Please do read Farmer Boy. In the book The Long Winter, Laura's family live in the same little town as Almanzo. No, I'm sorry to say, Mary never regained her eyesight. Yours sincerely, Laura Ingalls Wilder. So, be on the lookout in secondhand stores, in antique stores. There may be a Wilder letter yet to be discovered. This has been a wonderful adventure for me to collect these pieces of correspondence, and it's been fun talking to you about the experience today.
I think Bill will be happy to answer questions, so if you raise your hand, I'll pass you the microphone and you can ask the question.
You talk about your archives here. What are your plans for all the research that you have done and all that you have collected? Have you made a decision what you're going to do with yours?
It is a strange feeling having to go back through all this past material and to figure out what to do with it. For the last dozen or so years, when I've had a little extra time here and there, I've culled through things and shipped off items that I thought the Wilder museums would appreciate, particularly the tangible things. And I've done the worst thing that any possessor of notes, manuscripts, and papers can do. I moved the file cabinets down to the basement. I'm sorry, Dwight, but I didn't want to live in a museum or a library, and I had to do something with them. I did get some archives boxes, the same ones that are used here at the library, which are professional and acid-free and so on. So I put a lot of the most valuable things that I have in those. And I have those up above the basement level. And I was glad I hadn't divested all that material because I needed it when I did this selected letters of Laura Ingalls Wilder. I have no other books on the Wilders on the horizon, no plans to do it. But yes, when the time comes, I will do the right thing with all this accumulation of knowledge that I've been privy to and fortunate enough to collect.
Bill? I think I've heard you talk about the unfortunate situation where there were some Wilder papers in Smet that were destroyed and some things we will never know what might have been there. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, in the introduction of this book, I tried to trace what happened to all the other letters that we don't have. There are some huge gaps in the Ingalls Wilder story that are irretrievably gone. I'm sure that they'll never turn up. And in De Smet, the 3rd Street house that Pa Ingalls built in 1887 was their final home. The Ingalls family were savers, just as their succeeding generations were. And I think about all the letters that Laura must have sent back to her folks during their early years in Missouri. There are only a few that still exist. That must have been in the Ingalls home. All of the postcards and letters that rose from her foreign travels sent to her grandmother and aunts in DeSmet. And when that house was finally vacated in 1928, it became a rental property. And one of the bedrooms in the upstairs was set aside for the Ingalls family belongings. So the renters couldn't use that room. It was chock full of old quilts and trunks and clothes and remnants of their housekeeping years, and piles of braille and embossed print material which belonged to the blind sister, and letters which were bundled up and wrapped in string, postcards and so on. We know this family kept in communication. Finally, in 1946, the house was sold, and the owners wanted access to that room. So a truck was pulled up underneath the two-bedroom windows, and the material in that room was simply thrown out of the windows and filtered down into the truck bed and taken to the family dump. A friend of Carrie Ingalls Swansea superintended that. There were no relatives around. There was simply no one to superintend this, to have any input in it. Carrie had just died. Laura was far off in Missouri, close to 80 years old. She didn't know what happened. And the person who superintended this was necessary action. Went to Aubrey Sherwood of the DeSmet News, who was the iconic historian of Wilder at first, and preservationist of DeSmet history. And Mrs. Starr said, "Aubrey, I feel so terrible. I've done the wrong thing. We let all that Ingalls history go out to the dump," but it was too late. So there's a huge gap. Around the same time, Carrie Ingalls Swansea died in Keystone, and she had a great deal of the family material. It would be interesting to know of the correspondence that Laura and Carrie kept up during the time the Little House books were being written, because Laura inquired about many things to her sister Carrie. All of that's gone. And after Laura Ingalls Wilder died in 1957, the Rocky Ridge farmhouse was just chock full of papers and books and so on. Rose was anxious to leave there. She never liked the place. She wanted to get back to Connecticut. In those frenzied days after her mother's death, she made a quick tour through the house and was staggered with the amount of historical material there. She did some purging and burning and destroying of the family papers. Fortunately, she overlooked the penciled manuscripts and great chunks of what had been saved, but there are some holes in the family story that certainly would have filled in some of the gaps. So I have to say, we're fortunate so much has been saved, but it is a loss that so much was lost.
I was wondering if Carrie or Grace had any kids, or if you've been in touch with any of their ancestors.
No, that was the problem. Out of the 4 Ingalls children, Laura's daughter Rose was the only next of kin, the only grandchild of Charles and Caroline Ingalls. This was a family that, became extinct, and Rose had no children.
Yeah.
So when there aren't interested relatives, these travesties happen. When you have to clear out a house, put it up for sale, somebody has to do it.
So none of the other girls had kids except Laura?
They didn't. Laura had an infant son that died, and Rose, who died in 1968. Fortunately, for all of her ambivalence about her work with the Little House books, in her cedar-lined attic in Danbury, Connecticut, were these hundreds of letters between her mother and herself about writing the Little House books, intermediate drafts, and everything that was in Rose's Danbury house is here at the Hoover.
Mine's kind of a long question. Just in light of things that are going on in our country right now with racial relations, I've been thinking about Laura's books and how African Americans are portrayed. And I'm just wondering, as an educator, what can you tell, an educator how to handle like the minstrel show in Little Town on the Prairie? And I realize that the doctor in Little House on the Prairie is a very positive character, but the minstrel show thing is not a very positive portrayal. And I'm just wondering what you can say about that.
Very good question. This has been brought up numerous times. Let's start with the Native American situation. Essentially, Charles Ingalls was a squatter in southeast Kansas. He had no business being on the Osage ceded lands. And the people that were moving into that area were really encroaching upon the Osage. And at the time the Ingalls family were there, there was a lot of unrest, as you know from the book Little House on the Prairie. And things were being ironed out with Washington for the Osage to be paid fairly for their lands and move on, unfortunately. And a treaty was offered to them, which President Grant wouldn't sign because he felt that they were being gypped and weren't paid enough money for their lands. The Ingalls family returned to Wisconsin. And although they endured some fearful times while they were in southeast Kansas, what actually happened was the purchaser of their property in Wisconsin defaulted on the payments so they could return home, and they had a place to go to. They had a home to return to. But the depiction of the Native Americans, particularly in the 1990s, drew fire from educators, from librarians. I was on a panel with Michael Doris at one time, and although he loved the Wilder books, read them as a kid, and read them to his children, he, being having Native American blood, was rather incensed about some of the comments, racist comments made in the Little House books. But he looked at it objectively, and I agree with his idea. When reading these books to children or teaching them in school, they offer learning opportunities for children particularly, and discussion. When I was in third grade, we were the product of watching Westerns on TV and movies, and I realized we were totally ignorant of Native Americans in reality. We had stereotypical views. And the Wilder books can teach some great social sensitivity, particularly with the Native Americans. In one of the letters that I've included in the book, a reader in the 1950s wrote to Ursula Nordstrom at Harper and Brothers and mentioned the fact that the book Little House on the Prairie made the statement that the Ingalls family were going to, I don't know if she said Kansas or exactly where, there were no people there. And the letter writer in the 50s said, this isn't right. And Miss Nordstrom contacted Laura Ingalls Wilder, and she was very, very disturbed by the blunder. And she said, of course, Indians are people. So that change was made in the book. At the time, the uniform edition, illustrated by Garth Williams, was published in 1953. Later on, when that new edition was being prepared, the issue of the minstrel show in De Smet was brought up. On that, Mrs. Wilder was a little bit, more than a little bit, unconcerned. Minstrel shows were a popular form of entertainment during her youth and probably into the 20th century. And nobody seemed to pick up on the fact that they were perhaps very much so demeaning to people of color. And she said, yes, let's take the word coons out of one of the songs that was used, but I can't imagine anybody would be concerned with using the word darky. So Mrs. Wilder was a product of her times, and she meant no malice or prejudice to anyone. Now, on the converse there, I think one of the most significant letters that I included was a letter that she wrote to her daughter in around 1920. At that time, she was the secretary-treasurer of the Mansfield Farm Loan Association, and she had a little office on the town square in Mansfield where she did business a few days of the week. And she wrote Rose of a very significant event. She said, a man of color came in to inquire about taking out a loan. And she greeted him and shook hands with him. This is around 1920, very southern Missouri. The people that surrounded her were a little aghast at her action, but she told Rose she saw nothing wrong with this. She was, by nature, a very democratic person. She abhorred child labor, which kept kids from school. Anything that demeaned women, she had it good. She did not need the suffragist movement or the women's movement, because I think she was the boss in the family. And she was very conscious of ill treatment to anyone. So I think that letter that you may read circa 1920 is a great enlightenment about her social views. She had no qualms about shaking this man's hand and treating him as an equal, as a customer of the loan company. Are you a teacher?
Almost.
Almost? Okay. Well, I think it'd be a good teaching opportunity if you should read the books to your children or study them. I always look at this a little bit deeper. The Minnesota Massacre of 1862 would have been fresh in the mind of Caroline Ingalls. Here she is out on the Kansas frontier with two little children. Oftentimes she was alone in the log cabin. She must have been terrified because the news, the press coverage of the Minnesota Massacre was very extensive, and she knew some of the horrors of that event. So there are many ways to look at this situation in the books.
On that note, if anyone has any more questions, you can take it up with Bill in the lobby as he signs your book. So let's thank Bill again for his presentation. And thank you all for coming, and safe travels home.
Thank you, everyone.